Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the dusty, sun-baked lanes of ancient Sumer, a place where the air hums with cicadas and the scent of warm clay fills your nostrils. Picture this. You're standing barefoot on cracked earth, somewhere near the Euphrates, around 3000 BCE. The sky is the color of old parchment, and in the distance, a pot crashes to the ground with a dull, defeated thud. Again. You're not dreaming this. Well, you sort of are. But in the world you're in tonight, that sound, that single tragic ceramic implosion, means something. Something cosmically suspicious. See, in Sumerian times, if a pot broke without warning, you didn't just shrug and blame poor stacking. No, that would be too easy. Instead, people around you begin muttering about omens. Or worse, about them, the ones from the skies. You're told not to say their name out loud just in case they're listening. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake enough, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start your day, such as it is, since Sumerian days start when the temple bells ring, with a yawn and the feeling that your cot, made of woven reeds, has done nothing for your spine. You shuffle outside, blinking into the golden glare. A neighbor stares forlornly at a pile of ceramic shards by the doorway. "That's the third one this month," she mutters. "It's the stars again. They're angry." You nod sympathetically, as if you too have been keeping track of planetary grudges. What she really means is, something up there broke her pot. Some unseen force lurking beyond the clouds, knocking over amphory in the night. Mainstream historians might say pottery broke often in Sumer because, well, it was everywhere. It stored beer, grain, water, goat cheese, documents, even makeup. It was sun-dried or fired in simple kilns, strong enough for groceries, not so much for earthquakes or enthusiastic toddlers. But in this sleepy village near Eridu, it's easier to believe that cosmic visitors are behind the mess. It's quieter that way. It spares you the domestic argument about who left the pot near the edge of the counter. Spoiler, you did. You trudged through the packed earth streets, sandals crunching on stray pebbles and dropped lentils. Dogs bark lazily in the distance. You pass children playing a game that suspiciously resembles dodgeball with slightly softer figs. One pauses to inform you, "The aliens are coming back tonight." You ask carefully, "What aliens?" "The ones who ride the fire stars," he says, matter-of-factly, launching his fig missile at a friend's shoulder. "They knock things down when they're grumpy." You file this away, under village knowledge, somewhere between "don't eat figs that smell like vinegar" and "always bribe the goat to behave at weddings." There's a dull boom from the east. Not the sky, though. It's the temple kiln. Old Marduka is firing another batch of ceremonial bowls. You squint toward the smoke column curling lazily into the sky. As you watch, a bowl rolls off the edge of his work table and shatters. He doesn't curse. He doesn't flinch. He just looks up at the sky, squints thoughtfully, and murmurs, "Maybe it's the moon god's day off." A mainstream archaeologist might argue that this is just superstition filling the explanatory gaps. But historians still argue whether this belief in celestial meddling was metaphor, misinterpretation, or sincere. After all, to the Sumerians, gods and stars weren't distant. They were personal, like nosy landlords or mildly sarcastic relatives, always watching, occasionally intervening. And if a pot cracked on a holy day, that was no accident. That was a message. Back at your borrowed hut, you try to repair a chipped jar using mud paste and quiet prayers. The mud paste helps slightly. The prayers are more for your own comfort. You recall what an elder told you yesterday over flatbread and fermented date juice. Aliens don't like when your jars are too clean. They get jealous. That's why you leave a thumbprint on the side. So they know you're humble. There's no record of this in the archaeological record, of course, but that's what makes Sumer so oddly delightful. For every documented temple inventory or legal tablet, there's 10 oral traditions, quirky, undocumented, and stubbornly believed. You lean back against the wall, looking up at the sky through the slatted roof. The stars are out, faint but steady. Some Sumerians mapped constellations that don't quite match ours. Others claimed stars were holes punched in the roof of the heavens, letting divine light shine through. A few, however, only a few, said the stars moved on their own sometimes, that some stars blinked like eyes. And when they blinked, pottery cracked. Maybe it's the dryness of the air. Maybe it's the subtle breeze shifting the hut's reed walls. But you hear something, a faint clink. Then, a soft thud. You rise slowly. There, in the far corner of the room, one of your jars lies on its side, its neck cleanly snapped. You look up. The stars blink again. You're standing in front of a low, soot-streaked structure that smells like scorched sand and wet hay. Marduka's pottery kiln. It groans faintly in the morning heat, even though the fires inside haven't been stoked yet. You can hear the muffled shuffle of the potter's sandals as he arranges yesterday's batch for drying, muttering to himself about cracked rims and disrespectful wind spirits. You duck your head to enter the shaded work area, and it's like stepping into a clay-splattered oven. Shelves line the walls, bowed with the weight of bowls, jugs, and amphorae in various states of readiness. Everything here is beige, brown, or terracotta. Even Marduka, slumped over a lump of spinning clay, seems carved from baked earth. Careful, he grumbles, not looking up. The new batch is still moody. You nod solemnly, as if you understand what that means. One jar sneezes and you'd believe him. The potter gestures to a small stool, which creaks alarmingly as you sit. You're here to understand, really understand, how these humble vessels formed the backbone of one of humanity's earliest civilizations. Not just water jugs and stew pots, but storage for cuneiform tablets, ritual urns for temple offerings, and yes, the occasional alien-blamed casualty. Marduka's hands move with the same rhythm as the river nearby. Slow, steady, inevitable. You watch clay rise and form beneath his fingers like magic. It's not. It's years of back pain and clay dust in the lungs. But it looks like magic. He tells you, in between the wheel's lazy squeaks, that Sumerian potters used mostly river mud mixed with chopped straw or crushed shell. If the mud's too wet, your pot will weep, he says. Too dry and it'll shatter just to spite you. You ask cautiously about the ones that shatter after they're made. He pauses, then squints up at the sky again. Sometimes they're just unhappy, he murmurs. Other times, well, you know how the stars get. Right, the stars. To the average Sumerian, every cracked pot had layers of meaning. Was it a sign from the goddess Ninhursag? A warning about a neighbor's moral failings? Or, and this was not as rare as you'd think, was it the influence of sky beings meddling from above? You're tempted to ask what a pot has to do with aliens, but before you can, a bowl at the far end of the shelf gives an ominous wobble. You both freeze. Time seems to hang just for a second. Then, crack. It's not dramatic. It doesn't explode. But a clean hairline fracture splits the bowl right down its middle like a lightning bolt. Marduka groans. See? That one knew you were asking questions. You both laugh, sort of. Half a chuckle, half an, oh no, not again. Mainstream history, of course, acknowledges that pottery was vital to Sumerian life. It stored not just food and water, but identities. Potters often signed their wares with simple marks, proto-branding in the ancient world. Elite households had finely painted ceramics with religious motifs, while rural folks used unglazed, utilitarian jars. What fewer history books mention is the personal relationship Sumerians had with pottery. These weren't disposable containers. They were familiar objects, used daily, handed down, sometimes named. When they cracked unexpectedly, it felt more like betrayal than inconvenience. You remember a curious tidbit you heard at the temple last week. One priest claimed a whole family moved house because of a cursed stew pot that broke every full moon. The pot was eventually buried, upside down, with a chalk circle around it. No one dared dig it up. Is that history? Is it folklore? Historians still argue whether tales like these were common beliefs or fringe superstition. But in your dreamlike wanderings through Sumer, those lines blur like ink on damp clay. As you follow Marduka outside to the drying yard, the heat hits you like a sandstorm. Rows of pots stand baking in the sun, arranged like soldiers awaiting inspection. A few wobble slightly in the breeze. You think they're whispering to each other? Marduka asks, smiling for the first time. You glance at the jars, imagining a faint hum, some ancient frequency only they can hear. Maybe they're complaining about being too hot. Maybe they're plotting to all crack in unison just to mess with you. You reach out and gently tap the side of a storage jar. It echoes faintly. No cracks, no humming, just silence. Good one, you whisper. Behind you, another pot sneezes, or maybe it was just Marduka's donkey in the stable. You leave the kiln yard and make your way through the dusty lanes again, brushing past fig trees and reed baskets piled high with onions. Everything here seems fragile, woven, sun-dried, stitched, or glazed. Life itself depends on things not breaking. So when they do, well, maybe that's why people needed the alien excuse. You pass a young girl selling chipped bowls as star-marked, claiming they offer protection. The aliens touch these, she says with complete sincerity. They won't fall again. You buy one, just in case. The ziggurat looms like a layered mountain carved from sun-dried dreams. You squint up at it from the bottom, wiping sweat from your brow with a cloth that's already given up. It's tall enough to pretend it can touch the sky, though still short enough that you can hear someone shouting from the top about goat sacrifices being rescheduled. You've been invited, somewhat accidentally, to join the Sky Watchers of Eridu. These are not astronomers in the modern sense. No telescopes, no lab coats, no coffee-stained spreadsheets. Instead, they have wooden sticks for measuring angles, burnt pebbles for marking shadows, and an unsettling ability to stare at the sky for 12 hours without blinking. You ascend the steps slowly, carefully, because they're uneven and your sandals are older than they look. At each level, the air gets thinner, the breeze cooler, and the pots fewer. Apparently, Even gods don't like doing pottery on an incline. At the summit, a scribe in a linen tunic offers you a date snack and a solemn nod. We observe the movements of the Anuna, he says, pointing toward a set of hand-carved star maps etched into clay tablets. They send signs when they're displeased, especially about domestic storage. You weren't expecting ancient astronomers to care so much about jars, but as he guides you to a platform aligned with the horizon, it starts to make a kind of strange sense. The sky isn't just decorative here, it's interactive. It governs planting, marriages, taxi, and apparently pottery survival rates. They show you how Venus, or Inanna as she's known here, dances in the early morning sky. When she rises crooked, a priest murmurs, expect something to fall. You look behind you. A bowl on a pedestal is wobbling in the wind. No one moves. It stops. Everyone exhales. Mainstream scholars agree that Sumerians were among the first humans to chart the heavens systematically. They recorded celestial movements, predicted eclipses, and named stars long before astrology had Instagram accounts. But alongside this practical stargazing, they also believed the skies held moral weight. A red moon might mean war, an eclipse could signal betrayal, and a comet? Well, a comet was everyone's problem. One surviving omen tablet, real, baked, and scribbled with the calm dread of someone who's seen too much, reads, "If a pot breaks on the day Nergal frowns, the house shall be heavy with debt." No pressure. Your guide shows you the current sky chart, a piece of river clay pressed flat and marked with neat wedge-shaped symbols. You spot the familiar three-pointed symbol of Sirius and the jagged glyph that stands for possible interference from above. That last one gets used more often than you'd expect. Sometimes, the scribe whispers, they come in dreams. The visitors. You ask if he means gods. He blinks slowly. Some are gods. Others are less talkative. According to the fringe folk, those delightful eccentrics every ancient culture had, some stars weren't stars at all. They moved against the grain, appeared and disappeared, or blinked like they were thinking. These were the ones blamed for strange events, spoiled grain, spoiled children, and yes, broken pots. You glance at the bowl again. Still not moving. Good. Another priest adjusts a copper-plated sundial, frowning. Too much solar chatter lately, he mutters. The sky is noisy. You're not sure what that means, but he hands you a tiny amulet anyway. A crude image of a winged disc. For protection, he says, from pottery accidents. Historians still argue whether these symbols were literal warnings or just artistic exaggeration. Some say the winged discs represent meteors or ancient sightings of comets. Others, more creatively inclined, claim they're depictions of early alien craft, misinterpreted through the lens of a clay-happy civilization. As the sun dips lower, the sky turns a rich ochre, painted with streaks of amber and plum. The ziggurat casts a long, dramatic shadow across the village. From here, the rooftops look like a spilled game of dice. You imagine tiny clay pots balanced on each one, just waiting for a divine sneeze. Below, a dog barks. Then, there it is, a pot, mid-village, shatters. The sound rises faintly up to you, carried on the breeze like a confession. The priests murmur amongst themselves. One pulls out a tablet and begins writing. Another leans toward you. We'll add that to tonight's reading. You ask what that means. If 3 pots break before moonrise, he says gravely, We recommend everyone sleeps in the grain storeroom. Fewer sharp corners. You're starting to wonder if the aliens have a sense of humor. You thank the watchers for their time, for the snack, and for not blaming you yet for the pottery pandemic. As you descend the stairs, you glance up one last time. The stars are just starting to twinkle. Some are fixed, some are not. And some, if you believe the whispers, are watching right back. By now, you've seen enough pottery explode to make you mildly suspicious of anything ceramic. So when you wander into the central temple courtyard and a small, unmarked jar wobbles slightly on its pedestal, you keep a safe distance and pretend you're deeply fascinated by a nearby fern. The temple scribe, whose beard is somehow both elegant and vaguely threatening, welcomes you inside. Come, he says, we're reviewing the omens. You follow him through a cool, incense-scented hall, its walls etched with glyphs and pictograms that look like someone tried to summarize the entire cosmos in 6 lines or less. You pass a small altar littered with broken cup handles and vase necks, each lovingly labeled in cuneiform. These, the scribe says, are not accidents. These are messages. You're ushered into a back room, dim, quiet, and full of low wooden benches. A few other scribes are hunched over clay tablets, recording reports. You spot one that reads, House of Nisir, third water jug cracked after eclipse. Another just says ominously, cow screamed, pot fell. The logic seems flimsy, but no one questions it. Here, the gods are real. The sky speaks. And when stuff breaks, it's not because of wobbly tables. It's because something wanted it broken. You're handed a tablet. Blank. The scribe gestures to it solemnly. You've witnessed many breakages, he says. What do you think is causing them? You hesitate. Poor craftsmanship, you offer gently. There's a long pause. The air thickens like clay slurry. Or, you add quickly, perhaps, visitors? He nods approvingly and walks away. That's how you end up helping compile the tablet of unusual household events. It's a working title, as you copy the neat wedge-shaped signs for jar, fracture, and possibly celestial. You start to understand just how deep this belief system runs. It's not just one or two eccentrics muttering about the stars. It's everyone. It's institutional. The idea that gods, or beings even older or stranger than gods, might meddle in mortal kitchens was part of how Sumerians understood the world. Historians still argue whether these visitors in the tablets were metaphors for bad luck, euphemisms for earthquakes, or sincere records of supernatural encounters. But when you're holding a baked clay report titled The Pot That Broke During Star Movement and Goat Panic, it's hard not to believe something weird was going on. The scribe returns, now carrying a fragile-looking shard with a carved symbol on it, a 4-pointed star inside an eye. We found this in the ruins of Lagash, he says softly. We don't make pottery with this mark anymore. You trace the symbol with your finger. It feels slightly raised, like it's pushing back. Some believe, he adds, lowering his voice, that this is the sign of those who came before. Before us, you ask? Before us, he confirms, meaning not just the Sumerians, but everyone. That's when he shows you the list. An actual, honest Tuinana inventory of unexplained breakages. Each entry comes with the date, lunar phase, direction of prevailing wind, and, most crucially, whether the pot fell by hand beast or unseen force. Over a third are labeled unseen force. You raise your eyebrows. Sometimes, he adds, People claim to see something just before it happens. A shimmer in the air, a light, a humming noise. You ask if he's ever seen one. He shrugs. Once I sneezed and 6 cups fell off the shelf. Some blamed me, others blamed them. I blamed gravity. A rational voice, a rare species around here. Still, the idea that unseen visitors knock over your dishes to send coded messages seems oddly soothing. It gives meaning to the mundane. It turns your clumsiest moment into divine theater. And let's face it, the aliens did it is way easier than explaining to your spouse that you tripped over the cat again. You leave the temple just as the bell sounds for mid-meal prayers. People bow toward the setting sun and chant softly, thankful for their food, their shelter, and presumably for any pottery that hasn't shattered today. A young novice runs past you holding a cracked cup and shouting, "Another one!" No one looks surprised. The sky is turning pink. It's the kind of pink that makes you wonder if the sun is hiding something. You glance up. No blinking lights, no streaking fire stars, just the gentle assurance that something might be watching. You wonder if it cares whether you finished your lentils. The night bazaar unfurls slowly, like a woven reed mat rolled out under the moon. Oil lamps flicker to life, each one casting little golden halos that wobble with the breeze. It's not a place of hustle. This isn't the market for grain deals or camel swapping. This is where you come for soft figs, quiet rumors, and a handful of dried fish that may or may not still blink at you. You drift between stalls, the scent of roasted barley and fermented date paste guiding your steps. A musician strums a lyre in a half-hearted lullaby while children chase each other with sticks meant to be ceremonial. But the real action, if you can call it that, is at the corner where a cloaked figure stands on a slightly elevated clay crate. He's old. You can tell by the cracked sandals and the long gray beard that looks like it may contain several small birds. But his voice, surprisingly crisp. Last night, he declares, the fire stars moved against their usual pattern, and 3 pots broke in my home. The crowd gasps softly. Someone clutches their soup bowl protectively. You sidle closer, as curious as everyone else. He has a following, maybe 6 people deep, listening intently as he spins a tale of lights in the sky, humming air, and one unfortunate storage jar that exploded without provocation. They come, he says, not to invade, not to teach, but to test. There's a pause. Someone whispers, "Test what?" "Our balance," he answers dramatically. "Our structural integrity." You stifle a laugh, which would be rude, given how completely enthralled everyone else is. Mainstream historians might say this is performance, spiritual theater, tapping into common fears and awe of the cosmos. But here, people drop coins in his cup. They nod solemnly. One woman offers him a preserved fig and asks if the visitors accept gifts. "They've never said no," he replies gravely, taking the fig. As you wander further, the bazaar becomes stranger. You find a booth selling impact-tested ceramics, pots with deliberate cracks painted gold, marketed as pre-fractured, post-interference safe. Another stall offers charcoal sketches of what the sky beings supposedly look like. Big heads, long arms, occasionally wings. One child points at a sketch. "That's what visited my brother's dreams," she says. You ask if it said anything. She nods. It said, "Stop putting onions near the water jars." Then she skips off, like that was a completely normal sentence. A spice merchant waves you over. He's arranged his wares in concentric circles around a cracked amphora, sealed with wax. This, he whispers, fell during the red moon 2 years ago. I heard a voice from inside it. It told me to sell more cumin. You ask if cumin sales improved. They did, he nods. The visitors know things. Fringe? Yes. Entertaining? Absolutely. But historians still debate whether these tales reflect actual sightings or were simply a convenient way to explain everyday mysteries. After all, it's easier to accept the supernatural than to admit you stored your barley on a tilted shelf during a full moon earthquake. Still, not everyone in the market's buying the alien idea. At a quieter stall near the outer path, an older woman selling jute cords mutters under her breath. People blame the sky, but they don't clean their floors. That's the real curse. You nod. It's the kind of wisdom you'd embroider on a pillow, if Sumerians had throw pillows. At the edge of the bazaar, a low wooden bench circles a fire pit where the storytellers sit. These aren't priests or prophets. They're what we'd call bards. Tonight, the one with the green sash is holding court, and his story just so happens to involve a pot that survived a lightning bolt, only to be pushed over by a shimmering figure with no feet. He had no mouth, the bard continues, voice silky, but he hummed like bees caught in a jar. And when he vanished, the pot was gone. The audience shivers, not from fear, but from delight. Everyone loves a good pot napping. You settle onto the bench, warmed by the fire and lulled by the rhythm of the tale. You're starting to feel like pottery is less a household item and more a cosmic barometer, like your dishware is in a relationship with the universe and occasionally gets dumped. A young man next to you whispers, "Do you think they get mad when we stack them wrong?" You shrug. It's as plausible as anything else you've heard tonight. A few hours pass. The fire dies low, and people begin to trickle back to their homes. The prophet with the beard gathers his coins. The cumin merchant locks up his mystical amphora. The bard hums a lullaby as he tucks his clay tablet notes under his tunic. You rise slowly, your legs stiff, your head full of stories that dance somewhere between dream and anthropology. Above, the stars glitter lazily. You swear one of them just blinked. Dawn slides in reluctantly, like a shy guest at a feast, painting the rooftops of Eridu with pale honey light. You're already awake, woken not by birds or temple bells, but by a loud crack, followed by a groan that could only belong to someone whose relationship with ceramics is spiraling. That someone is Nargil, the village's official pottery overseer, or, as he introduces himself, inspector of jars, manager of vessels, warden of lids. You meet him near the public storerooms where several large storage pots have given up on life overnight. Nargil is pacing. His hands flutter as he points out the wreckage, muttering about humidity, improper stacking, and that one goat who keeps leaning on things. You suggest aliens. He snorts so hard he nearly swallows his reed stylus. I swear, if I hear one more priest say the stars are smiting our containers, he grumbles, kneeling to examine a jagged edge. This was not smitten. This was dropped clumsily by someone with a very guilty face and very sticky fingers. He gestures dramatically toward a retreating child whose tunic is stained with date syrup and remorse. Despite his exasperation, Nargil takes his work seriously. You follow him through the storerooms where goods for trade, taxes, and temple offerings are stored in color-coded pots. Well, color-coded by decorative dots, since actual paint costs more than bread. He taps each pot as he passes, listening for flaws. They speak, he insists. You just have to listen. A good jar rings, a bad one whimpers. Mainstream historians agree that Sumerians developed some of the earliest systems of standard measurement and quality control. Nargle is part of that legacy, even if he insists he once fired a pot so perfectly balanced it sang a note that made a baby stop crying. You ask him gently about the sky-born theories, about the blame passed to unseen forces and winking stars. He stops, sighs, and sets down his inspection scroll. Look, he says, I've seen pots crack in the sun. I've seen them collapse under a pyramid of lentils. I've seen one explode because a beetle crawled inside and panicked. You nod. You're waiting for the but. But, he continues, I've also seen a sealed amphora, untouched for months, split exactly in half under a full moon. No heat, no movement, no reason. You raise your eyebrows. I had it buried, he adds quietly, wrapped in a fishnet, like we do with cursed loaves. That's the thing about Nargil. He wants to believe in logic, but he also keeps salt pouches near every kiln. As you follow him outside, he shows you the inspection tablets. Each cracked vessel is cataloged with its origin, contents, location of fracture, and, this part is recent, possible celestial interference. Management insisted, he mutters, rolling his eyes. Apparently, the high priest wants trend data. You glance at a recent entry, jar number 77. Contents, pickled onions, fracture pattern, spiral, cause, unconfirmed, possibly Venus. Historians still debate whether these records were pragmatic or partially performative. After all, clay tablets were bureaucratic tools, but they also reflected the fears and stories of their time. And if enough people say the stars are cracking your cookware, you write it down for insurance, if nothing else. Midway through the storeroom tour, another pot goes. It doesn't fall. It doesn't tip. It just emits a faint ping, then develops a hairline fracture like a lazy lightning bolt. Nargle stares at it, then up at the sky, then at you. I'm going to pretend that didn't happen, he says firmly. And you are going to pretend that's not the third this morning. You both pretend. Poorly. He marks it down anyway. You spend the rest of the morning shadowing Nargil as he trains a new assistant, an overconfident teen named Dumuzi, who insists he once fixed a cracked pot with honey in a prayer. Nargil is skeptical, rightly so, as Dumuzi's first inspection ends with a pot slipping from his hands and shattering dramatically. There's silence. Then Nargil just writes on his tablet, cause, apprentice hubris, stars indifferent. Later, while Dumuzi sweeps shards and questions his career path, you and Nargil rest under a palm tree near the outer wall. I don't mind the alien stories, he admits, eyes half closed. It gives people something to talk about, something not about taxes or grain rot. You ask if he's ever really seen anything strange. He thinks for a while. There was one night, he says, when I couldn't sleep. Full moon, quiet. I went to the kiln to check the coals, and there was a figure, tall, still, glowing a bit, standing right by the clay shelf. When I looked again, it was gone. You ask if any pots were broken. No, he says. One was slightly more symmetrical. He laughs. You do too. Maybe the visitors appreciate good craftsmanship. You're invited, well, tolerated, into the home of a wealthy scribe named Ashnugal, a man whose name sounds like a sneeze and whose collection of perfectly balanced pottery is the talk of at least 3 courtyards. His house is a mud brick mansion by Sumerian standards, 2 stories high, with windows cut like careful slits to keep out dust and too much divine opinion. The entrance is flanked by guardian statues that look faintly embarrassed to be here, and the courtyard boasts a fig tree so well fed it leans smugly toward the sun. Inside, it's cool and surprisingly quiet. Until crash. A servant gasps. A voice calls out from upstairs. Did someone breathe near the ceremonial wine jug? You're led past the domestic wreckage into a sitting room where Ashnagal himself lounges on a woven mat, surrounded by clay tablets and half-finished fruit bowls. He waves lazily, as though broken pottery is more of a personality quirk than a household emergency. That's the third this week, he mutters. If the visitors are trying to make a point, they need better handwriting. You glance toward the shelf. Another jug sits too close to the edge, clearly daring gravity to make a move. Ashnagal explains that despite his education and political connections, he once corrected a priest's math mid-sermon. He firmly believes the recent rash of cracked pottery has something to do with celestial interference. Not the gods, he clarifies, the others, the ones who don't accept incense. His wife appears, arms crossed, frown carved from pure basalt. Or maybe, she says, the shelf is crooked. Ashnagal shrugs. Coincidence. This, you realize, is the real source of tension in Sumerian households, not marital drama, but whether a broken bowl is your fault or an alien's. You're shown the problem area, a long wooden ledge holding dozens of ceremonial vessels. Half have faint fractures. One has a symbol carved on the bottom, a spiral with what looks like tiny feet around it. I didn't make that, Ashnagal says, proud and nervous. It appeared after the lunar festival. Historians still argue whether such markings were simple decorations, family crests, or attempts to record unexplainable phenomena. One theory posits that artisans occasionally added odd symbols when asked to craft pots during eclipses, part prank, part protection. Another theory suggests those symbols were imagined later by households desperate for answers after an unexpected crack. Ashnagal's daughter enters holding a broken ladle and a story. It happened again, she says dramatically. I was pouring barley soup and heard the hum. What hum? Ashnagal asks. She closes her eyes. Like bees, but angry bees. Ashnagal leans toward you and whispers, See? She's been marked by the humming. You resist asking if maybe the ladle was just old. That kind of logic doesn't hold up here. Later, in the kitchen, you help clean up the remnants. A servant tells you that last year, during the rains, all the storage jars began cracking one by one. No wind, no rats, just pop every few minutes, like someone tapping them from the inside. You ask what they did. Buried them, she says, with onions. Keeps the watchers away. You make a note. Onions equals alien deterrent. Add that to your growing toolkit of Sumerian interstellar defense strategies. At dinner, you're served lentils in a bowl that Ashnagal claims has survived 2 eclipses and 1 ghost infestation. You handle it with reverence. No pressure. As you eat, the conversation turns to pottery etiquette. Never stack bowls after sunset. Never wash jugs during a full moon, and always leave one pot upside down near the door in case they drop by. You ask if they ever knock. Ashnagal taps his nose and smiles. They don't knock, they vibrate. You begin to suspect half the town enjoys how weird this all is. Maybe the pottery conspiracies are less about fear and more about fun. Ritualized nonsense that helps people bond over soup and superstition. Still, the broken pots keep piling up. One falls during dessert. Ashnagal's wife sighs. I told you about the crooked shelf. I told you about the humming, he replies, dabbing his mouth. The stars twinkle above, entirely unapologetic. You excuse yourself politely, stepping outside for some air. In the alley, you find a servant lighting a small oil lamp beside a pile of shards. She whispers something in Sumerian and places a tiny offering, a fig and a pinch of salt, on the broken pieces. For peace, she says, seeing your puzzled look. You nod. The wind shifts slightly. Somewhere far off, a pot gives into its destiny. Night returns with a soft exhale, brushing the village with cool air that smells faintly of river reeds and cooked lentils. You follow the path past the temple gardens and down toward the banks of the Euphrates, where the fishermen tell their stories after dark, not for tourists, not for scribes, but for each other, and sometimes for visitors like you. A semicircle has formed around a small fire pit. Smoke curls lazily into the night, tangling with the occasional buzz of a night beetle. Most of the men here have hands calloused from nets and sunburns, so permanent they look carved. Their voices are low, gravelly, and slow. Perfect bedtime energy, really, except for the subject matter. Tonight, they're telling fishermen stories, not metaphors, not drunk cousins. Fishmen. They rise from the river, says one, poking the fire. Walk like us, but slower. You'll hear them before you see them. Splashing, humming, sometimes singing, and then the pots go. You ask the obvious question. What do aquatic beings have to do with pottery? Another fisherman leans in. They take them. Always clay ones. Never the woven baskets. Maybe they can't digest wicker. He's serious. They're all serious. According to the tale, one fisherman emerged just after a blood moon, walked right up to a dock, scooped a jug of pickled garlic, and vanished. The next morning, 5 other pots along the shore had cracks shaped like crescent moons. Mainstream historians typically categorize these figures as mythological. The Apkallu, for example, half-man, half-fish beings from Sumerian lore, are said to have emerged from the rivers to teach civilization to humanity. But scholars still argue whether those legends were symbolic, religious, or just a way to explain oddly damp footprints by broken amphorae. One elder, face wrinkled like sun-dried dates, points to the river. See that bend, he says? That's where the water runs backwards on certain nights. If your pot's missing in the morning, it's gone with them. You glance toward the bend. It looks normal, but you've stopped trusting normal in this place. A younger fisherman joins in, claiming he once saw one of the fishmen up close. Had scales, he says, and a pouch. Like a satchel, it was full of shards. Someone else nods knowingly. They collect broken pieces, like us with stories. You sit with that thought for a while. Maybe these stories exist to soothe the sting of daily loss. In a world where storage jars hold your family's future, losing one feels like losing control. Easier to believe that a river being took it than to admit your shelf was damp. You're offered a drink, some kind of fermented river fruit, and sip slowly while the tales continue. One man recounts a time when his entire set of fish-preserving pots disappeared overnight. No sign of a break-in, he says, just a trail of wet footprints that ended in the river. My cousin blamed thieves. I blamed the watchers beneath. You ask what the fishermen do with the pots. They learn from them, the storyteller shrugs. Our designs, our mistakes. Maybe they're building their own village down there. You imagine a sunken eridu, fishermen gossiping over their own broken jars, blaming the sky or the air or maybe you. As the fire dims, someone passes around a worn clay flute and plays a tune said to attract the fishermen, though it sounds suspiciously like the lullaby from earlier. Still, a pot near the fire gives a faint tick. Everyone freezes, but nothing breaks. Not tonight. Someone laughs softly. Guess they're sleeping. You thank the group and walk slowly back along the riverbank. Reeds sway gently in the breeze, and the water glows silver under the stars. You pause near the famous bend. There's a half-buried jar on the shore, cracked but intact. You crouch to inspect it, brushing sand from its rim. It hums, only faintly, like wind through a reed pipe. You straighten up quickly and look around. No one. Just the river. Just the stars. Just a pot that may or may not be part of someone else's bedtime story. The council chamber smells like old parchment and recent arguments. You've been granted access to a session of the Lugal's council, an elite group of scribes, priests, and people who use phrases like ritual risk management without blinking. Their main job is to keep the city running, crops growing, taxes flowing, and ideally, pottery not shattering mid-blessing. You enter just as someone slams a clay tablet onto a low table. It makes a thud that everyone flinches at, either from the sound or from the fear that the tablet might crack and invite cosmic commentary. The debate is already heated. Today's topic: do the stars cause pottery failures, or is it just butterfingered teenagers? The high priest of Inanna raises his hand and speaks with the calm authority of someone who wears exactly the right number of necklaces. We have observed 3 breakages this month, all during lunar oddities. That is not coincidence. That is intervention. Across the chamber, a portly merchant waves a chipped bowl and counters. Or maybe your temple acolytes shouldn't carry ceremonial wine in last year's jars. The room buzzes. You sit quietly on a reed mat, next to a scribe who scribbles aggressively and whispers all the gossip between motions. That's Belshunu, he says, nodding at the merchant. He's been lobbying to replace temple jars with copper ones. Says the aliens can't crack metal. Historians still argue whether these councils were democratic or just controlled theater, he adds with a wink. You don't ask how he knows what historians are. Another counselor, a young astronomer with an ink-stained tunic, unrolls a star chart and points to a specific cluster near the eastern sky. Last week this star moved, she says, and on that same day, 8 pots fractured in the North District. That pattern means something. She looks around, daring someone to dismiss her with a smirk. No one does. Instead, someone else brings up the humming again. Apparently, residents have reported a subtle buzzing right before their amphory fracture. Like a whisper made of static, one clay vendor said. I heard it myself, says a woman from the craft district. Right before my best grain jar exploded, shards everywhere. My cousin thought it was a thief. But who would steal just the bottom half? You're beginning to wonder if the council is less about passing laws and more like group therapy for breakage anxiety. Still, some propose practical solutions. Mandatory pot anchors, someone suggests. Tie them down during full moons. Temple-wide fasting on days of high stellar motion offers another. If we don't eat, we don't cook. Fewer dishes involved. Someone proposes sacrificing a perfectly good vase to the stars to appease them. This is met with muttering and at least one audible, Ugh. The Lugal himself, seated on a slightly higher platform, on a slightly more symmetrical chair, finally speaks. His voice is gravelly and oddly soothing, like warm sand sliding through your fingers. Whether by gods, by visitors, or by unbalanced shelves, he says, our city must adapt. He gestures toward a servant who unveils a new type of pot, a prototype designed by local artisans. It has extra thick walls, a triple-rimmed base, and small holes along the side for optional hanging charms. They're resistant to heat, cold, and possibly cosmic disappointment, the servant explains. Someone claps. Another mutters, "We'll see." The Lugal turns to the council. We approve 5 dozen for trial use. If they survive the next moon cycle, we redesign all temple storage. You can practically hear the potters cheer somewhere off in the distance. As the council breaks for a snack of sesame cakes and mint tea, you chat with one of the younger members, a woman named Annie, whose role is Observer of Small Oddities. Yes, that's her real title. She tells you that unofficially, she's been tracking broken pot incidents against wind patterns. There's a trend, she says, but it doesn't align with weather. It aligns with that. She points skyward. You follow her finger to a faint, slow-moving point of light that doesn't blink like the others. What is it, you whisper? No idea, she replies. But whenever it passes, pottery fails in pairs. 2 pots, always. Sometimes 3, never 1. Back in the chamber, the scribe beside you mutters, I'm just glad they haven't blamed me yet. You pat his shoulder. A pot in the hallway shatters. No one speaks. They just add it to the list. Sleep comes lightly in Eridu, especially after a full day of pottery debates and light cosmic dread. But eventually, you do drift off, somewhere between midnight and whatever time it is when frogs start singing. But not for long. You wake with a start. There's a low humming in the air. Not loud, not constant, just enough to press gently against your ears like a breeze you can hear, but not feel. You sit up in your guest mat, wrapped in the linen sheet that smells faintly of roasted barley. The walls of the house are quiet, but the clay lamp on the shelf flickers oddly, as if it's reacting to something near it, not just the wind. Outside, the moon hangs crooked. Not wrong exactly, just slightly tilted, like a tired smile. And then you hear it. Footsteps. Software measured. Wet. You tiptoe to the doorway and peek out. The street is empty, but the air feels tense, like the village is holding its breath. A figure turns the corner, robed, tall. You blink. It's the high priest. He's walking deliberately toward the temple, barefoot, robes trailing, carrying what looks like a broken pottery shard in one hand and a bundle of herbs in the other. Curious, and let's admit only half awake, you follow. The temple is quiet but lit. Torches flicker along the walls. The door is ajar. Inside, incense curls upward in spirals, forming shapes you probably shouldn't look too closely at. The high priest moves to the altar, places the shard on the stone, and begins to chant softly in Sumerian. It's melodic, rhythmically hypnotic. You almost forget what you're doing there until he stops mid-chant and says, without turning, "You should not be here." You freeze. I just dropped by," you mumble, like someone who forgot this was a sacred interdimensional pottery ritual. He turns slowly. His face is serene, but his eyes are tired. "They visit in dreams," he says. "Not with words, with visions, sometimes hands." You glance at the shard. It's smooth on one side, but the other has a strange indentation, like a thumbprint, but longer. They dislike disarray, he continues. They dislike noise. And most of all, they dislike being misrepresented. He steps back and lets you approach the altar. The shard is warm. There are patterns, he says. Some see them in stars. I see them in breakage, where the cracks form, how they radiate. It's a language. Historians still debate whether these kinds of ceremonies were symbolic expressions of power or genuine attempts at communication. But you're starting to understand why that question remains unanswered, because the line between meaning and madness is hairline thin, like the rim of a well-fired bowl. You ask him what the beings want. To be remembered, he says, but not as gods. He walks to a nearby chest and pulls out a sealed jar. It glows faintly. Probably just glowworms. Probably. This was left after a dream. It appeared beside me. Perfectly formed, never seen clay like it. And it hums. He sets it down gently. You lean close. Yes, it's humming. Not from inside, but somehow around itself, like sound that hasn't quite found a place to land. I don't let the others see it, he admits. They'd say it's trickery or madness. You ask why he's showing it to you. Because you haven't denied anything yet. Fair point. He offers you a piece of dried plum and asks if you dream in symbols. You say sometimes. Good, he replies. They favor symbolic minds. Literalists tend to lose pottery faster. You stay in the temple a while longer, sharing quiet conversation and the soft, rhythmic sound of chanting from a room you're politely not invited into. Eventually, he walks you back to the threshold, offering one final thought. Sometimes things break because they must. Sometimes they break because something wants in. The trick is knowing which. You step back into the night, just as the moon straightens itself. Back in your cot, the humming fades, and in the corner of your room, one of your jars leans ever so slightly, but doesn't fall. Yet. Morning arrives as it always does in Eridu, reluctantly through a haze of dust and the distant clatter of someone already breaking something fragile. You wake to the sound of chants outside your window. Nothing alarming, just the soft, sing-song rhythm of the weekly charm market setting up. Today is the 8th day of the lunar cycle, which according to local belief is the best day to buy protection amulets for your pots. You shuffle into your sandals and head toward the plaza, rubbing the sleep from your eyes. A chicken nearly trips you. You apologize to it out of habit. The charm stalls are already surrounded. Clay discs hang from poles, clinking softly in the breeze. Each one is etched with a different ward. Anti-fracture spirals, eye-shaped sigils to deflect observational pressure. Even crude alien-looking stick figures said to confuse sky spirits who target household items. A woman behind a table motions you closer. You look like someone whose storage jars live in fear, she says. You nod. It's hard to argue with the accuracy. She presents you with options. A lid carved with the sign of Nana, the moon god, for nocturnal protection. A tiny net woven from goat hair to drape over emotionally unstable vessels. A pebble painted black and white, meant to absorb cosmic frustration and release it into the floor. You buy all three. As you move on, you pass a potter's apprentice selling bundles of crack-begone herbs allegedly harvested during meteor showers. You ask what's in them. He shrugs. Mostly mint. Maybe some luck. Mainstream historians acknowledge that talismans were widely used in Sumerian society, especially for domestic protection. What's less clear is how seriously they were taken. Some researchers argue they were psychological tools, ritualized comforts in a world of chaos. Others believe they were sincere efforts to control fate through material culture. A tall vendor in a bright tunic beckons you to his stall, which is lined with cosmic balance charms. He claims to have once sold a set to a priest whose pots then survived 3 eclipses and a goat stampede. How do they work, you ask? Geometry, he says, and fear. You thank him by a low-stress lid and continue browsing. One stall offers singing bowl, not the meditative kind, but actual bowls designed to emit a soft tone if they begin to crack. Early warning system, the seller explains. They hum before the fracture reaches the rim, gives you time to beg the stars for forgiveness. There's a surprisingly long line. You find a shady spot near the fountain and unwrap your new purchases. The goat hair net feels surprisingly soft. You drape it over your favorite jug, whispering a charm the vendor gave you. O stars above, go break a stone. Let this poor vessel stand alone. Not exactly Shakespeare, but it has a sleepy sort of rhythm. You're joined on the fountain's edge by an older man with a crooked walking stick and a satchel full of broken trinkets. Reclamation artist, he says, holding up a cup with gold-filled cracks. The aliens break, I fix. It's a business. You admire his work. The pottery looks like it's been laced with starlight. They send messages, he continues, not to scare us, to teach us where we're weak. You ask if he believes they're real. He laughs softly. Oh, they're real, but not like up there real, more like around the edges real, the kind of real that disappears if you look straight at it. He hands you a charm, just a shard with a hole drilled through it, and tells you to keep it close. That piece came from a jar that cracked at the exact moment a comet appeared, he says. No one even touched it. You thank him, hang the charm on your belt, and feel oddly reassured. Maybe all this is just old superstition wrapped in decorative clay. Or maybe, just maybe, there's something to the hums, the patterns, the way the air changes seconds before the shatter. Back at your hut, you place the new lid on your oldest jug and tie the goat hair net around it like a shawl. It looks ready for a tea party with ancient spirits. For the first time in days, nothing breaks. At least not yet. You're not sure what wakes you. Maybe the persistent mooing, maybe the strange greenish light leaking through the cracks in your reed window. Or maybe it's just that unsettling gut feeling that something is deeply wrong with your local livestock. The mooing continues. It's not normal mooing. It's long, drawn out, vaguely offended. You throw on your tunic and step into the dusty pre-dawn haze. A few neighbors are already gathering near the outer pastures where the temple cattle are kept. The cows are restless, circling and bellowing with more drama than usual. Their eyes are wide, their tails swish like metronomes on edge. And in the middle of the pasture, a pot, broken, again. This time, though, the context is different. The pot was tied to a post, not for storage, but as part of a fertility charm meant to protect the herd from sky envy, a charming bit of lore you learned from a priestess last week. The idea is that the stars, jealous of the cow's productivity, occasionally lash out by shattering something close by. Better the pot than the cows, she had said with a shrug. The current priest on duty, A sleepy-looking man with eyebrows that seem to have grown independently of his face examines the shards. Split right along the offering glyph, he mutters. Just like last month. Farmers murmur among themselves. One woman points to the hills. Saw lights last night, she says. Bright ones, blue, danced like beetles. Another farmer, not to be outdone, claims his bull snorted in iambic rhythm before knocking over a jug of lentil mash. Never seen him do that before. You're handed a small tablet listing past incidents. Most involve cracked vessels and bovine agitation. One note reads simply, milk curdled before sunrise. Possible eclipse? Possible alien cow stress? Mainstream history acknowledges that Sumerians had complex systems for interpreting animal behavior, especially that of sacred animals like cows, goats, and the occasional goose. They believed that divine messages often came through unusual livestock activity, but historians still argue whether odd cow behavior prompted alien theories or whether alien theories justified the weird cows. A young shepherd points to the field's edge where small circles are etched into the dirt, perfect smooth rings about the size of a large pot lid. You bend down to touch one. The soil is warm. Found those this morning, the boy says. Wasn't there yesterday. You suggest maybe the cows walked in a circle. They don't walk that neat, he replies, deadpan. There's a low whump from the temple bell. It's the summoning tone. Someone wants to investigate further. You follow a small crowd up the hill to a lesser-known shrine dedicated to a minor pastoral deity whose name translates roughly to he who calms the bleaters. Here, a clay bowl used in sacrificial milk rituals has shattered overnight. The priestess, who looks exactly like someone who hasn't had her barley porridge yet, stares at the mess and sighs. Another one. You ask if this happens often. Only when the cows scream, she mutters, gathering the pieces. We've changed priests. We've changed offerings. We even tried different clay. You suggest alien interference. She pauses. You're not the first to say that, she admits. There was a shepherd 2 years ago. Swore he saw something land by the watering hole. Said it hummed. Pots broke. Sheep ran in circles for an hour. What happened to him? He moved to became a bean counter. Said it felt safer. Back at the pasture, the cows have settled more or less. Someone's hung a garlic braid over the post where the offering pot used to be. Aliens hate garlic, a farmer says, with a straight face. You raise an eyebrow. Well, he adds, so do snakes, and maybe there's overlap. A helpful boy drags over a replacement pot, smaller, less decorative, probably less emotionally valuable, and gently ties it to the post. A charm is whispered. A soft bell is rung. For now, the cows seem calm. You turn to leave, but not before a final glance toward the circle marks. They haven't faded. If anything, they look sharper, like something pressed down hard and didn't quite bother with an explanation. In the distance, a new pot wobbles. It doesn't fall, but it wants to. The market's just wrapping up for the day when you meet him, the foreign merchant, with eyes that don't blink quite right and a voice like water poured over flat stone. He's tall, draped in layered robes that shimmer slightly in the sun, though not enough to make a scene. His accent is hard to place. Sumerian, yes, but with an off-tempo rhythm, as if every third word was borrowed from a forgotten dialect. He smiles too easily, too patiently. His teeth are very straight. You'd have passed him by if not for the display on his table. Pots, not ordinary ones, not the lopsided village kind or the ceremonial temple pieces. These are precise, perfectly symmetrical, glazed in a finish that seems to shift color when you tilt your head. One has a faint glow, which might be a trick of the light, or not. The merchant nods as you approach. New design, he says. Imported techniques. You ask where from. He smiles. Far, very far, beyond where boats float. That's not helpful. He lifts one of the jars with unsettly ease. These do not break, he says. Not by fall, not by heat, not by misfortune. You ask if they're magic. Better, he replies. They are understood. You peer closer. The pots are etched with unfamiliar markings, similar to cuneiform, but sleeker, more flowing. No sharp angles, more like ripples in sand. Historians would label this non-standard regional variation, which is academic speak for we don't know, but it probably wasn't aliens. Still, there are scattered accounts, barely noted clay fragments found in digs across Mesopotamia that hint at odd, unmatched pottery styles. Pottery that doesn't belong. You touch one. It's warm, not just from the sun. Inside warm. Some say the patterns prevent interference, the merchant offers. Others say the patterns invite it. Depends who you ask. You ask what he believes. I believe pottery should not suffer. Fair enough. He shows you a smaller jar. A travel-sized model, he jokes. When shaken, it hums faintly. Not musical, not aggressive, just a vibration that dances through your fingertips like a memory of sound. You buy it. You don't know why. As he wraps it in a cloth that smells faintly of citrus and copper, he leans closer. Keep it upright, he says. If it tilts, it listens. You want to ask what that means, but he's already greeting the next customer, a wide-eyed child offering 3 onions and a button. You wander through the last of the market crowd, clutching your strange new jar like a nervous parent. Back at your lodging, you place it carefully on the shelf. It doesn't hum again. Not yet. The next morning, you return to his stall. It's gone. Every jar, every cloth, even the dust beneath his mat. You ask the neighboring vendor, the sesame oil lady, where he went. She squints. Who? The tall man, the merchant with the glowing jars. She frowns. There was no one there. That stall's been empty all week. You don't argue. Back home, the jar remains still. You tap it once. It taps back, just softly, just enough to make you laugh nervously and check that you're still dreaming. Later, while sipping something that claims to be tea, you remember a story from the temple archive, a tale of a visitor from the outer sands who brought vessels that whispered secrets and never broke, no matter how high they were dropped. Who would need such strong pots? The scribe had wondered. Someone who travels, another had replied. You glance at the jar. You swear it's smiling. You're back in the temple courtyard again, sprawled out on a mat under a fig tree that insists on dropping its fruit at irregular and suspicious intervals. A soft breeze stirs the dusty tiles, and somewhere nearby, a flute sighs through a lullaby that hasn't been updated in about 1,000 years. Next to you is Asuili, the bard whose beard is long enough to require its own mailing address, and whose voice is the closest thing Sumer has to a lullaby-shaped blanket. He's agreed to recite from the old epics, specifically the ones they don't usually read during temple hours. These aren't for ceremony, he explains, unrolling a reed scroll so aged it has moss growing on the corners. These are the fringe tales, left-hand verses, stuff they'd rather we forget. You scoot closer. Tonight, he says, we speak of sky chariots and temple vases. You're in. He begins with a chant so low and gravelly you can feel it in your toes. The story unfolds slowly. Once, in the time before kings, the sky cracked open and chariots of fire descended. Not gods, not exactly, but watchers of vessels. They came not to rule nor to warn, he chants, but to observe how mortals kept their lentils. According to the tale, the watchers wandered through Eridu disguised as wandering potters. They judged households by their containers. Too many cracks, and a rainstorm would follow. Too much decoration, and your goats would fall asleep for a week. One noblewoman, unaware of her guest's true identity, served stew in a chipped bowl. The next morning, every pot in her home had vanished, replaced by smooth stones etched with constellations. You ask if this really happened. Asuili raises one eyebrow. Everything happened. Somewhere. He sings of a pot so finely crafted that it was lifted into the stars and became part of a constellation. The vessel of 9 souls, a faint cluster near what we now call Pisces. Historians still argue whether these epics were purely allegorical or encoded accounts of something else entirely. A few fringe scholars, ones not invited to most conferences, suggest some epics preserve oral memories of celestial phenomena, possibly comets, possibly spacecraft, possibly something stranger. Asuili pauses for a drink of date wine and then recites the tale of a priest who built a kiln to match the arc of the sun. His goal, to create a bowl so perfect it would resist time itself. When he finished it, he placed it on the altar and waited. 3 nights passed. On the 4th, the stars shifted. The bowl cracked, but inward, not outward. What does that mean? You whisper. Asuili shrugs. Depends who you ask. Some say it was the sky absorbing the offering. Others think the bowl was never really here. You both stare at your own water jug for a while, unsure how much reality you're willing to question tonight. Another tale begins. This one's about a warrior who kept a shard from a shattered ceremonial pot as a good luck charm. It whispered to him before battles, always in the voice of his grandmother. No one else could hear it. Eventually, the warrior buried the shard beneath the roots of a fig tree to protect it from the stars. Not because he feared the heavens, Asuili says, but because he didn't want them to take her voice. You glance up. Fig tree, hummingbird, pot resting by your elbow. It all fits a little too neatly. The final tale of the night is half-whispered, a record of a temple vessel that was said to float slightly when placed in moonlight. Not levitate, not fly, just rise enough that dust never settled on it. The priests took turns watching it. Eventually, they stopped trying to explain it. Instead, they just prayed near it and hoped no one sneezed. One night, during a solar eclipse, it cracked with a sound like thunder, but only inside the heads of those watching. No one spoke of it again. The scroll ends with a single line. May your vessels never hum in anger. Asuili sets down the scroll, stretches, and hands you a fig. You heard nothing, he says with a wink. You thank him, your brain full of cosmic riddles and clay fragments with attitude. As you stand to leave, a bowl behind you emits a soft ting, not a crack, not a warning, just acknowledgement. You nod at it. It does not nod back, but somehow you feel seen. The wind is dry today, whispering across the rooftops like a tired scribe turning pages. You've taken to sweeping the temple courtyard in the mornings, part habit, part meditation, part community service for lingering in forbidden chambers. A young apprentice joins you, barely 10, tunic still too long, hair tied back with a fraying reed cord. Her name is Tia. She's been assigned to light cleanup, which in Sumer usually means don't break anything important. She doesn't speak much, just hums softly while collecting scattered fig pits and the occasional mislaid sandal. But then you hear it, a sharp clink followed by a muffled tisk. Tia stands over a shattered jar. Again. It was nothing special, just a simple water pot, pale clay, unpainted. You'd seen it that morning. It was fine, sitting calmly beside the temple wall, minding its own business. Now it lies in pieces like a rejected puzzle. You approach slowly. Tia doesn't look scared. She looks puzzled. I didn't touch it, she says, not defensively, just matter of fact. It cracked on its own. You nod. Of course it did. You both kneel, carefully gathering the shards. Each one is surprisingly smooth. The break lines form a starburst pattern, elegant, intentional almost. I saw a light, she says quietly, just for a second, near the rim. You glance at the sky, clear blue, cloudless. Nothing unusual. But then again, when has the unusual ever been obvious? She hands you a shard. There's something etched inside, so faint you have to tilt it to see. Not a word, not a symbol you recognize, just a groove, a spiral that coils inward like it's thinking about something. Do you think it was them, she asks? You don't answer, not because you don't know, but because the more you learn, the more the answer stops mattering. What matters is that something about this pot, this last broken jar, feels like a period at the end of a sentence. You and Tia carry the pieces to the offerings bench, placing them beside other shards collected over the weeks. Some are marked, some are humming. One is still warm. A priest passes by and nods solemnly. More sky news? Probably, you reply. As the afternoon fades into golden light, you sit on the bench and watch the dust rise gently from the floor, curling in lazy spirals. You think of the cracked bowl that started all this, of humming jars, of glow-eyed merchants, of fishmen and watchful stars. You think of all the pots you've seen, heard, questioned, blamed, and gently forgiven. Each fracture was a whisper, each missing shard, a pause in conversation. And now, as the sun dips behind the ziggurat and shadows stretch like tired cats across the courtyard, it feels like the pottery has finally stopped talking. Not because it has nothing more to say, but because, for now, it's been heard. Wind down, 300 words. And so, as twilight settles over Eridu and the stars, blink open one by one, your eyelids begin to grow heavy. The clay dust in the air softens, no longer dry, just weightless. Each breath you take is slower, steadier. You can feel the coolness of the stone beneath you, the faint hum of evening insects, the occasional sleepy murmur from someone carrying water back to their home. The village quiets, the sky deepens to a velvet blue, and somewhere a fig drops soundlessly onto a reed mat. Tonight, no pots will break. Tonight, the watchers, whether from stars, rivers, or imagination, are content. And maybe, just maybe, your own thoughts begin to quiet too. The little worries, the creaks in the mind, the things not yet done. Let them slip away like pottery dust through open fingers. You're safe here, in a world where even broken things are gathered carefully, cataloged, and given meaning, where stories are whispered gently, not shouted, and where sometimes The best explanation is the one that lets you sleep. So go ahead. Let your limbs grow heavy. Let the hum of jars fade into the rhythm of your breathing. And if you dream of clay and stars and sky chariots tonight, know you're not the only one. They're watching too, quietly, peacefully, and always, always with curiosity.